Hey there, welcome. I'm glad you're here. If today was loud or messy, you don't have to carry any of that now. Find a comfortable spot, let your shoulders drop, and breathe the easy way. There is no storm tonight. The sky is clear and still, and the lamp can do the work of the moon. You've done enough. For the next while, I'll do the carrying. You can just listen. Tonight we're going somewhere steady and warm, a medieval castle kitchen. Not the noisy feast in the great hall, but the quiet room beneath it that wakes before everyone else and keeps the whole place alive. We'll follow one ordinary day from the first glow of embers to the last soft clink of ladles on their hooks. No rush, no drama. Just the kind of careful work that makes a room feel safe. You'll hear about bread being weighed fairly, water brought in without spilling, salt treated with respect, and fires coaxed the gentle way. It's all simple, honest things, told slowly enough that your breath can match the pace. If you drift off at any point, that's perfect. The story will keep its rhythm without you. Let your jaw unclench, loosen your hands, and let the day step back. Tonight we'll move together at the speed of a calm room. When you're ready, we'll step inside and begin where every good kitchen begins, at the hearth, where warmth remembers how to wake. Before the birds think of a first note, the kitchen breathes. Night has not ended, yet the room begins its quiet routine the way a tide begins to move long before anyone notices. Under the ash on the great hearth, red seeds of yesterday glow with a secret that only gentle air can translate. A hand cups near the coals, a careful breath travels across them. A twist of straw accepts a spark without fuss, and the first small flame remembers what to do. Iron trammels hang in their old places as if time itself had arranged them. Chains wait without complaint. Hooks know their tasks and do not argue. Light grows by degrees that suit the hour, painting the soot with a faint orange that feels like a whispered promise rather than a command. Water must be won before any other plan dares to exist. In the yard, the well rope is cool and slightly stiff, and the wooden pulley speaks in a soft, even voice that no one minds hearing. The bucket descends into dark, touches the surface, and returns with a slow, obedient weight that teaches patience to the shoulders. A yoke rides across the back to share the burden, and footsteps choose the high ridge of the path where mud misbehaves less. Inside, ewers take their stations, one near the kneading board for flour and hands, one by the scullery for basins and knives, one within a quiet reach of the salt, so the little bowl will never be handled with dust on the fingers. A thin cloth hangs nearby, ready to dry palms in a way that leaves no lint to visit the dough. The oven receives a greeting that looks like respect. No shouting, no banging, only the language bakers trust. A hand hovers near the mouth to read heat the way a gardener reads weather. A pinch of flour touches the stone and tells its story in color. Pale, then fawn, then the shade that means now. Kindling is set with a mind for flow rather than blaze. Faggots for heat, billets for length, a narrow lane for air, so the flame will walk rather than stumble. The peel leans where many mornings have asked it to lean. Its long handle remembers every palm that ever carried bread into brightness. Soot falls in a slow, dry curtain when a damper answers a pull on its iron tail, and the throat of the chimney learns once more which way to persuade the smoke. The pantry opens its cool breath like a cellaring hymn. Shelves admit a tidy procession of small facts that matter more than speeches. Loaves from yesterday sit under cloth, firm enough for trenchers once the hour agrees. A heel of cheese waits in linen with the patience of a saint. A basket of eggs rolls no further than it should, then rests. Later someone will turn each shell so the yolk does not wander. In the buttery, jugs hang by their loops, rinsed and reversed to dry without a watermark. Small beer settles under its cap of foam and decides to behave. A tally stick lies on the table and shines with clean notches, a wooden page that will read the day without boasting about it. Flour is measured the way fairness would like to be measured if fairness had hands. Scale pans meet the beam. The beam draws a level breath, and the numbers do not wobble. Leaven from yesterday lies in a small bowl under a cloth that smells faintly of warmth. When tepid water touches it, the old starter lifts its head as if it had been called by a friendly name. Salt granules become smaller under a thumb, because this mineral remembers the sea and deserves courtesy. At the kneading board a mound forms, and then becomes something with character. Heel and fold, turn and rest. A rhythm settles into the shoulders, and then into the dough itself. It will be left to think beneath the cloth while other parts of the room demonstrate their loyalty to sequence. Knives meet the strop for a visit that improves them without turning them arrogant. A long spoon inspects its own smooth grain and finds no splinter that would like to join the pottage. The spit turns once, empty, only to prove that its round idea has survived the night. A drip pan slides into place to save the flagstones from tales they do not need to remember. Onions and leeks wait near the door where air is honest, and a small bundle of herbs rests in a damp square of cloth, so the oils will remain friendly until they are invited to speak. A spice cup receives a precise number of peppercorns. This is not a room where anyone loses count simply because something is small. Everything that would scent the day stands by as if listening for a conductor. The scullery clears its throat in a very modest way. Basins are stacked in a sequence that any river would admire. A tub of sand glitters like a promise of clean wood. A jar of ashlie sits where careful hands can reach it and careless hands cannot. Boards are inspected so a stray sliver of oak does not volunteer for a stew. Cloths are wrung until the water that leaves them is honest. A rack for ladles and spoons begins to sing that mild wooden music that sounds like work getting ready without a fuss. The floor wears yesterday's rushes, which are swept into a new arrangement, so the place smells a little like a field under sun rather than a yard under rain. Somewhere in the stone beyond the door, a bell marks a slice of time without asking anyone to hurry. The steward appears with keys that look older than most arguments and performs a tour that resembles a blessing. The oven mouth receives a glance and answers with a little gust of warmth. The hearth receives a nod that would satisfy a very proud fire. The pantry is read like a small poem. The buttery is read like an invoice that contains no unpleasant surprise. A name enters the ledger in a hand, so neat the page actually seems to stand taller. The boy who managed the yoke returns it to its peg with a sound of wood meeting wood that could pass for gratitude. Now the dough shows a softer line under its cloth. It will not be hurried, and no one would try. A bowl receives chopped onion and a strand of fat with a humility that remembers how rare such things can be. Water slips into the pot in a clear ribbon and begins to place its arguments before the iron. Nothing boils yet. Simmer is a wiser tutor for the morning. A ladle moves once through the surface so that floating flecks can learn the edges of the vessel. The first steam of the day wanders up the chimney and carries no complaint, only the idea that warmth, when treated correctly, can be diplomatic. In the yard, a cart chooses to test one axle and then agrees to be well behaved. A dog wanders to the threshold and arranges paws under a bench in a posture that means, I will listen. The doorway frames a rectangle of early color that does not claim to be dawn, only a relative of dawn that came ahead to see about chairs. Inward, the light finds the polished curve of a long spoon and decides to rest there for a while. Sediment in a jar settles because gravity enjoys moments of order. A broom leans against a pillar and appears to prefer that position over any other. You could call this the start of the day, though the day began an hour ago when embers agreed to remember flame. You could call it the moment the room woke, though the room never truly slept. It only paused between chapters. Someone draws the peel a little nearer to the oven and tests the stone again with a tiny whisper of flour. Someone sets a clean cloth at the far end of the board where finished loaves will cool in ranks that resemble patience given a shape. Someone adds 2 grains of salt to a bowl because a hand that trusts its memory still honors a scale when a scale is present. Nothing is dramatic, which is the drama of it. Procedures arranged so calmly that the air itself settles into harmony. From here the morning will widen, dough divided and tucked, trenchers cut, a first ladle of pottage offered to a taster who can read heat with a palate trained by many winters. Water will walk in and out as if the doorway were a tide gate. The ledger will accept more names and more numbers, and none of them will feel rushed. The hearth will carry a new pot, and then another, not because the room demands spectacle, but because nourishment is a sequence, and sequences favor rooms like this. By the time the sun admits it has been awake for quite a while, bread will lift its round backs, steam will write its thin script along the line of the beam, and every surface will suggest that human hands and patient tools can teach a morning to behave. If you were to stand very still, you would hear a chorus that is almost nothing. A small hiss where a log meets a coal, a slow echo inside the oven that sounds like a whisper from stone, the soft dip of a ladle through liquid that has chosen to accept warmth without argument. You would notice how the room holds its breath at each tiny success and then releases that breath in a way that tells no one about its pride. You would see why a single day in a place like this asks more than idle strength. It asks for attention, for repetition without boredom, for measure without vanity, for care that can be trusted even when no one watches. The first loaf goes in. The peel slides back with a motion so smooth it feels like the completion of a sentence. A hand brushes the board clear of flour in a single long stroke that reminds the eyes of calm water. A pot receives a pinch of herbs that traveled to the kitchen wrapped in damp cloth and arrived still willing to offer their green thought. The room adds these little events up and discovers that they equal peace. Outside, the sky considers the question of light and answers it gently. Inside, the kitchen has already answered its question for the day. Not how to dazzle, not how to impress. Only how to continue with dignity until the last pan is dry and the last spark knows how to sleep. The dough rests under linen with quiet confidence, breathing a little as warm air settles over the board. The scales wait with their shallow pans steady, and the steward brings them to life with a practiced touch. Weights on one side, portions on the other, until the beam levels and holds. Leaven from yesterday wakes in a basin of tempered water and answers with tiny signs that never rush, yet always arrive. Salt is pressed finer under a thumb until it moves from crystals to dust, then measured with care, because this mineral remembers oceans and demands courtesy. Hands enter the mass and work in a rhythm that belongs to the room more than to any person. Fold, press, turn, rest. Patience traveling from shoulders into gluten and back again. The dough changes under those hands. It leaves behind stickiness and becomes smooth, springing back with a modest pride. A single body made from flour, water, and yesterday's memory. Linen returns to its task and accepts the new roundness. The oven receives a report delivered without noise. A palm hovers near the mouth to read the radiant heat. A whisper of flour touches the stone and browns to a color that bakers recognize in their bones. Billets are set not as a pile, but as a slow river, faggots for vigor, larger wood for duration, a path for air so flame can walk rather than stumble. The peel waits like or for crossing, long handle worn satin by years, and near it lie the little house marks, a blunt pin for a dot, the end of a skewer for a line. Simple signs that will tell one batch from another when hunger arrives at once from many directions. The day's pottage declares itself in the mildest way. Beans that slept in water grow ready to listen. Barley is rinsed until the cloud clears and then falls into the pot with a sound like small coins finding their purse. Onions accept the blade without complaint. Leeks add their pale greens and that soft garden scent that means home. A ribbon of oil slides into the pan to smooth the first minutes so nothing takes offense at iron. The wooden spoon draws wide, patient circles. Steam rises and introduces the room to fields stored in sacks and to last season's sun. Herbs come forward from a damp cloth, rosemary, savory, thyme. Woken by a quick rub of finger and thumb, they enter the liquid as if joining a conversation that began long before dawn. Salt goes and not as a flourish, but as a negotiation, asking grain and garden to share the voice. The pot moves slightly aside from the center of flame so simmer can teach what boiling never manages. A film is skimmed along the edge with calm strokes. The lid rests at a slant to let the breath escape. From time to time the spoon writes a path across the base, so barley does not gather where heat presses hardest. Around this steady center, small tasks bloom like useful thoughts. Almonds are blanched and slip their skins, then ground with warm water in the mortar until a pale milk gathers. Mustard seed meets the pestle, and the slow pressure releases fragrance in steps, after which a little vinegar persuades the paste toward future service. The spice casket opens and closes with restraint. Pepper counted rather than scattered. Saffron teased into threads that carry sunlight without boasting. Ginger and mace allowed a quiet day because wisdom often chooses omission. In the cool corner, dairy rests under clean cloth. Cheeses on planks that still remember the tree, a jug of whey veiled from heat. Butter softening just enough to accept a knife. A ladle lifts one ribbon of pottage and lets it fall, judging thickness by how the line folds back into itself. A small nod passes between spoon and cook, and the room understands what that means. Proof completes its gentle arithmetic, and the linen rises as if it were a curtain about to reveal a familiar scene. The mass is tipped onto the board and divided by the scales, not by guessing. Each piece is tucked under upon itself until a smooth dome forms with just enough surface tension to promise a dignified rise. Loose flour is brushed away so nothing burns where it should not. House marks are pressed, a dot, a line, a cross, quiet signatures of the morning. The peel slides under the first round in one long, continuous motion. Body and tool move as a single line. Dough meets stone with a small sigh. Steam begins its private council with crust. Space is left around every loaf so air can work. The mouth is narrowed with a plug of clay. And the count begins, not with a clock, but with the length of a graceful walk to the scullery and back, with a glance across the ledger to confirm that yesterday's numbers still tell the truth, with the time required to wring a cloth and set a basin where hands will want it. When the door opens again, the color within is the color of stored harvest. A tap at the base returns a dry note that experts trust. Loaves are lifted to boards that breathe and set in a way that gives the crust its due. The scent that moves through the room is a kind that mends tempers without a word. Service begins without a trumpet. A tasting spoon carries a small measure to the side table, where the air is cooler. Approval arrives in one polite syllable and opens every gate. Trenchers, cut from yesterday's firm loaves, travel under a cloth toward the passage that rises to the hall. Pitchers follow, trained to pour without froth. The ledger accepts lines that look plain but carry real weight. Loaves counted in tidy ranks, grain allotted per person, oil taken by the measured dip of a ladle, salt by true scale, herbs by the handful that experience has certified across seasons. A junior cook decides whether the next pot joins the fire now or after one more slow turn of the spoon. That decision, tiny as it seems, will choose between calm and impatience at midday. The scullery stands ready 2 breaths ahead of need, basins brimming with clean heat, sand bright in the tub, racks cleared for the boards that will return with the marks of honest work. The hearth performs its favorite choreography, one pot inward, another a hand's breadth outward, so warmth behaves as a companion rather than a tyrant. At the threshold, a quiet dog arranges paws and listens. Outside, a bell offers one phrase to the air that could mean time or prayer. In this room, those words share a meaning. Bread cools with that faint, crisp murmur that borders on music. Grain yields itself to broth until the liquid holds both field and storehouse. The kitchen advances the day with a steadiness that would wear down anyone who approaches with nothing but force. The first batch breathes on its boards while the second crosses into heat. Almond milk is strained through linen rinsed without scent and set aside in a cool alcove. Mustard is scraped into a small jar and labeled in the steward's memory for the person who tolerates such vigor. Saffron threads are returned to their little box with a bow of the wrist careful enough to miss not one. A knife that visited the strop for only a few patient strokes draws a sample slice from a cooling round. The crumb shows even holes, a sign that leaven told the truth. The heel returns to rest, and the cut face is veiled so it does not dry before its hour. A ladle lifts one more ribbon of pottage and lets it fall. A pinch of salt is dissolved between finger and thumb and folded in, not as an ornament, but as a final duty. 2 leaves of herb are rubbed once and sent across the surface. A last quiet decision that finishes the thought without raising the voice. Near the pantry door, 3 new lines go into the ledger. Ordinary ink, extraordinary promise, linking the small machine of this room to the broader machine of the house so tightly that nothing feels accidental. The passage to the hall draws away boards of trenchers and a pair of jugs. Yet the kitchen does not feel emptied. Rather, it settles into a deeper rhythm. A second pot takes the first place, gentle heat rising through it like breath through a sleeping chest. The peel asks whether small loaves are due for servants' tables and receives an answer that sends 2 rounds in with a motion as smooth as the earlier ones. A boy spreads fresh rushes near the door where traffic grows, so the flagstones will not carry mud into the next hour. Outside, the square of sky at the yard center brightens by a degree. The line of the bell's rope shivers once and rests. Inside, someone sets a clean basin where a used one will soon wish to stand. Someone else lifts a pot just a finger's width and finds the flame kinder in that position. In these motions you can see the reason for the title we carry tonight. A single day here demands not brute energy, but repeated care, applied in the same direction, minute by minute, without applause. Care that would exhaust a visitor long before the sun admits it has been awake for hours. By the time noon considers its entrance, the room holds a fragrance that steadies any listener. Crust that cools and whispers, grain that has given its strength to water, onion that has learned sweetness without hurry. Loaves stand at respectful distances so air moves among them. A cloth is drawn across the board in one deliberate stroke, so the surface is ready for the next task. The steward notes how many rounds remain for the hall and how many for workers who will not dine on ceremony. A peg receives a ladle with the little wooden click that sounds like a promise kept. The dog blinks and decides nothing needs guarding. The bell rests. The oven mouth glows like a hearthstone after a story. If you could measure the quiet pride in the room, it would look like evenly spaced loaves and a pot with no scorch and a ledger without error. And if you asked why someone unfamiliar with this grammar would not last along this path for a whole day, the answer would not be scold or boast. It would be this. Fire asked to be courted rather than commanded. Water asked to be carried as law rather than as burden. Grain asked to be counted with justice rather than with guesswork, and time asked to be honored in its exact length. Nothing more, nothing less. Here, those requests are met, one after another, until the day stands balanced on its own feet and breathes in a way that invites rest. The great hearth is a city within the room, and fire is its law. Nothing begins without it, and nothing lasts if it wanders. Morning embers are persuaded into a measured glow, not with noise, but with the grammar of fuel and air. Thin splits accept a flame easily. Thicker billets offer duration. A narrow lane remains for breath, so the blaze does not thrash. A hand reads the heat the way a sailor reads wind. Palm lifted, knuckles turned, distance judged by the patience of skin. and the fire answers with colors that speak an older language than any ledger. To the left, a level bed of charcoal is raked into a low field for work that needs steadiness without smoke. To the right, a climbing ladder of oak gives a livelier tongue of flame for pans that enjoy cheerful energy. The andirons, iron dogs polished by 100 seasons, hold the fuel at a height that allows air to travel beneath. Above, black trammels hang like notes on a stave, each link a way to raise or lower a pot until water trembles, then learns to listen. The bellows rest nearby with a dignity equal to any steward, leather warm and beak pointed to the heart of things. One deep breath from that beak, and the cold bed brightens as if it remembered its purpose. Wood is chosen with a mind for its nature. Oak for warmth that lasts, ash for a clean flame and a fine bed of coals, fruitwood for a fragrance that does no harm. Green wood is refused. It hisses and sulks and covers iron with soot that later becomes argument. All this is decided before breakfast, because a room that feeds many cannot afford debate with its own fire. Iron remembers as well. Hooks that lift cauldrons are inspected for burrs. Rings that slide along the wall crane are judged for ease. The gridiron, dark with honest use, is rubbed until the rails shine with a satin rather than a stain. Knives that met the strop earlier pass under a glance, not for menace, but for reliability. Ladles and skimmers return to their pegs in a sequence the hand can find in the half-light. The peel leans within an easy reach, its edge wiped so no old ash rides into a new loaf. The spit, long, straight, balanced by habit, spins once in rehearsal, a narrow ribbon of light running along its shaft to prove there is no warp. Chains sing a kind iron music as they settle. The turner's stool sits at the correct angle so shoulders will not plead by noon. A tub of sand and a jug of clear water wait at the edge of the hearth where sense can find them without hunting. The spark screen stands near for moments when a resinous knot thinks too well of itself. Tongs rest where a hand can reach them without looking, because attention must remain on the flame, not on the search for tools. Nothing here is theater. This is discipline performed with quiet pride, fuel and iron arranged so heat behaves like a partner rather than a ruler. Soot and ash receive ceremony, because nothing ruins a day more slowly and more completely than a flue that refuses to draw or a floor that forgets how to be safe. A riddle sifts last night's bed, saving every coal that still carries a red heart. Siftings go to a covered tub for lye, where ash will later become soap water for scouring boards and pots. The hearth face is brushed from back to front in long strokes, so no grain of grit can leap toward bread or broth. The ash line at the threshold is gathered in a shovel with the care people reserve for money, then carried to the bin that waits under a lean-to where rain cannot meddle. The flue throat is tapped with the brush handle, listening for the dull thud that means creosote has begun to nest. Where the sound complains, bristles march until the throat answers with a cleaner note, and the smoke line rises the way a well-made sentence rises from subject to sense. Damp rush near the hearth curb sits ready to catch sparks that dream of travel. A cloth, kept for this purpose and no other, wipes the iron where hands will rest, so soot will not ride on skin and then on bread. Even the floor learns the routine. Rush is combed into a new arrangement. A path cleared where heavy pans will move. A dry corner reserved for stacked billets so it does not drink from spilt water and argue later with the flame. In such habits you can hear the room defend itself against chaos without raising its voice. Now timing takes the stage, not with flourish, but with the subtle art of matching heat to hunger. On the left, a cauldron lowers until the surface shivers, not a rampant boil, but that fine silver tremor that teaches flavor patience. Near the crane's hinge, where rising warmth licks rather than bites, a pot of almond milk thickens while a spoon draws lazy figure eights to prevent sulk in the corners. The spit receives its morning burden, trust so weight is honest and drips nowhere to fall. The pan beneath sits a finger nearer the brighter side, so the fat that lands there will stay awake and not sulk into pallor. A boy takes the turner's seat and learns a rhythm that has nothing to do with haste. A count of heartbeats for each quarter turn, a glance at the bright side to see it deepen but not blister, a listening for the soft hiss that means the drip pan is collecting exactly what it should. When his shoulders ask for mercy, another boy slides into the seat without ceremony, and the spit does not notice the change. Along the back, where radiant warmth is kind, a row of flat cakes in iron pans travels from pale to golden without complaint. On the charcoal bed, a small pot reduces a shallot liquor into something that will later pretend to be grandeur without ever forgetting modesty. The bellows sigh once or twice, never in panic, always as a reminder that breath is part of the recipe. The room smells of oak and bread and that faint, sweet note iron gives when it is doing exactly the work it was made to do. Fuel asks for manners, and hands that know this answer with tongs rather than with guesses. A billet is set, so its grain invites the draft rather than fights it. Another is nudged inward only when the first has offered what it could. A coal is pulled to the lip to lend calm beneath a pan that desires a measured simmer. Between each motion there is a pause, and that pause is as necessary as flame. It allows the hearth to tell the truth of the last decision before the next one begins. Dampers above the oven mouth receive a fingertip nudge that narrows the breath by a fraction. The color at the stone changes, and a baker translates that color into minutes without looking at any clock. The crane swings a pot forward by half a span. The trammel drops one link. The liquid inside stops arguing with itself and begins to agree. A skimmer passes across the surface of a shimmering pan and collects what does not belong. A ladle gives a silent drink to a place that asked. The peel carries around to the cool board with a slide that preserves the crust. The brush taps the flue and hears a clear reply. These motions look like nothing to a stranger. They are the architecture of a day. Midday approaches and iron earns its wage. The gridiron seats a row of slices that will serve as a simple indulgence for workers who dine behind the hour. The rails are rubbed with a cloth dipped in fat, so bread will take color without tearing. On the outer arc of the fire, an iron trivet holds a pot that would prefer warmth over flame. Steam flutters at the lid, and a hand rests there to read its pulse. Tongs turn the gridiron's charge with a gentle persuasion rather than a pinch. A hook lifts the spit pan a finger higher, so drippings do not leap. The turner listens for the note that says a quarter turn would be wise. He listens also for the sigh that says not yet. Another cook lays a spoon against the side of a pot and hears that soft, regular tap that proves gentle movement within. Too quiet, and the spoon says nothing. Too lively, and it chatters. Somewhere a splinter of resin wakes in the wood and throws a spark. The rush at the curb accepts it and declines to share. The screen shifts a hand's breadth and the matter ends. No story is made of it, which is the success. Heat must be managed for the room as much as for the food. Windows high in the wall remain on their latch, so gusts do not whip the flame into temper. The door stands open only as long as a body requires to pass, not out of stinginess, but out of friendship with the draft. Billets are stacked bark down so insects that wish to travel decide they would rather not. The pile is arranged so that the oldest would steps forward first, and no one is tempted to rob tomorrow for the sake of this hour. When an unexpected demand arrives from the hall, iron answers more readily than flame. A second trivet slides into place. A small pan inherits a square of heat borrowed from a corner where coal glows like banked fruit. The bellows lend a single breath. Air brightens a circle, not the entire bed. A spoon counts 30 and stops counting. The pan offers exactly what was wanted. The steward does not need to ask how it occurred. He has seen this sorcery every day of his life and never truly named it. By late afternoon, Ash has built a slope that asks for correction. The riddle appears again and turns gray powder into a resource. Sifted ash will travel to the laundry and become lye. It will polish a board better than pride. It will calm the sting of a fresh splinter if hands are washed in water that remembers it. A little pile near the lintel will serve as a dry seal for a jar that resists damp. What looks like ruin becomes service because someone bothered to think beyond noon. The stone lip at the hearth is wiped with a damp cloth, and then a dry one so grit does not wander into the evening's dough. The bellows are set on their side to rest their leather. The crane receives a smear of fat where iron rubs iron. A whisper of care will save a shout of repair later. The spit is cooled slowly, so straight metal remains straight. Chains are lowered link by link and left where air can dry them. The spark screen returns to its corner. The turner's stool is nudged back 2 finger widths. Tomorrow's shoulders will thank the one who thought of it. When the bell in the yard offers its phrase to the hour that leans toward evening, the hearth answers with a conversation of crackle and hiss that speaks of order rather than drama. Wood has given what it should. Iron has held its shape. Ash has accepted its afterlife. Heat has acted with good manners from first light to this moment. A visitor who arrives with admiration for force would have surrendered hours ago. Here, the day stands balanced because fuel was chosen with foresight, tools were placed with intention, soot was respected, draft was understood, and every motion, large or small, was timed to the breath of the fire. Before curfew, the blaze will be taught how to sleep, not smothered, only banked under ash so a red memory remains for morning. A final glance reads the stones. A palm lifts and learns what it needs to learn. The damper draws a calm line through the throat. The room exhales. And you understand, perhaps more clearly than at dawn, why a single day under this discipline asks more than muscle. It asks for attention that does not wander, judgment that never shows off, and a friendship with heat that cannot be bought. Some mornings begin with restraint, and some with permission. The calendar does not live on a wall so much as in the habits of the room. A lean day asks the kitchen to speak softly with fish, greens, grains, and almond milk. A feast day invites richer voices. Butter where oil would usually stand, spice where herb would normally suffice, sweetness where the tongue expects only salt. The steward states the rule in a single clear sentence, and the hearth adjusts without argument. Nothing here is sudden. The same hands, the same tools, the same patience, turned gently toward a law older than any person stirring the pots. On a lean morning, the larder opens like a careful book. Barrels hold salted herring under their stiff lids. Baskets of small river fish rest on shaved ice and fresh rush. Eels lie under damp cloth that smells faintly of the stream. A wooden rack carries walnuts and almonds for milks and pastes. A row of green herbs keeps a thin slice of garden alive inside stone walls. A basin waits with water and a little vinegar so fingers return clean between tasks. Cloths hang from pegs where light and air can make them honest again. Knives meet skin without show. Heads, bones, and trimmings save their usefulness for a stock that will learn patience at the rim of the fire. A thin veil of oil warms in the pan. Olive if trade has been kind, nut oil if the purse has chosen prudence, and flour, salted and barely perfumed with pepper, dusts each fillet with the modesty that suits the day. The sound that answers from the pan is more like rain on a warm street than a storm. It explains what will happen without insisting it be noticed. While the fish learns its color, almonds complete their quiet work. Blanched kernels lose their coats, then turn to paste under the pestle's slow circle. Warm water joins in careful measures until the mixture becomes milk, pale, smooth, and willing to behave. A linen square receives it, and the press is steady. The stream that falls into the bowl looks thin at first, and then gathers itself into richness without ever raising its voice. The meal left in the cloth will thicken a sauce later or become the soul of a simple cake. A few threads of saffron meet a spoon of warm liquid and give the milk a color that remembers late sun on stone. A hint of ginger wakes the scent. A modest grind of pepper steps forward and then stops. The pot sits on the outer rail, where warmth is even and polite. A wooden spoon draws slow circles that never scrape, and the thickening arrives at the proper time, as all good things do when flame is treated as a partner rather than a tyrant. Greens enter as the season permits. Spinach or chard takes 2 changes of water and returns as if the river had rinsed away yesterday. Leaves wilt in a pan that has already learned the feel of oil. Walnuts crush under the flat of a knife into a coarse generosity. A mild splash of sour grape or verjuice persuades everything to agree without quarrel. Breadcrumbs from yesterday's trencher fall through the fingers into the pan, so the greens hold a shape without heaviness. The bowl waiting for them is warm, but not hot. A cloth lies across the top so steam does not lay a sad film on the surface. Nothing screams for attention. The quiet is purposeful, like a clerk finishing a column before the bell. Fish comes from the pan to a board rubbed with a clove of garlic, not so much for taste as for memory. The shimmering oil in the pan receives a ladle of almond milk and a ladle of fish stock. A sauce forms that knows how to stand near food without climbing over it. The cook tastes with the back of a spoon, not for excitement, but for harmony. A pinch of salt moves the voice forward by half a step. A drop of vinegar anchors the last note. The sauce travels across the fish in a thin ribbon and stops when stopping seems right. Parsley, chopped fine and dried for a moment in a cloth so tears will not return, lands leaf by leaf. The platter looks like restraint learning how to smile. The pantry keeps its courtesy to the rule. No suet moves today. No lard slips into a crust. Pie cases for fish receive oil on the brush instead of butter. Paste is mixed with almond milk rather than cow's milk, and the difference is felt more in conscience than on the tongue. Custards sleep in their cups until a day that invites them to speak. The saffron that would gild a feast settles for the mild glory of an almond pot. Even crumbs come from yesterday, not from the new loaves that need their dignity for service. The house knows how to be generous, and it knows how to be modest. The grammar is the same, the sentences differ. By noon the quiet looks like competence. Stock hums at the edge of the fire. A second pan rehearses a relish. Capers if the merchant remembered, minced pickle if memory failed, parsley always. The steward passes through without disturbing the air. He notes that oil remains for tomorrow. He notes that almond meal waits in the bakehouse. He notes that the pepper line in the ledger did not leap forward. The bell speaks once. The hearth answers with a sigh that sounds like agreement, and the corridor smells of grain, river, and a ghost of vinegar from clean hands. Feast days share the same alphabet, though the words expand. The morning begins earlier, not for noise, but for time. Spit and pan confirm their places. The turner's stool receives a fold of cloth under each leg, so shoulders will not argue with stone. The spice casket slides nearer the steward's hand without losing its restraint. A loaf of sugar sits with the pale gravity of a small statue. A stick of cinnamon breaks with that bird bone crack that always makes someone smile. Wine for sauces rests near the hearth until it forgets the cellar and learns the room. Abundance arrives as manner, not as spectacle. The wafer iron wakes and warms until a drop of water dances away. Batter grows thin as patience demands. Flour, almond milk, a breath of oil, perhaps the smallest spoon of sugar if the purse and the calendar both encourage it. The first spoonful enters, the lid closes, the hinge speaks a private syllable. When it opens, a round carries vines and crosses the smith carved years ago. The room smells briefly like a festival morning by the choir. Rounds stack under a cloth so they curl to a gentleness that will allow a roll later. A spoon of almond paste, a whisper of rose water, and a promise of sweetness are set aside for the hour when gratitude seeks a small companion. Sauces dress differently when the day invites richness. Vinegar keeps its place as the quiet judge, and yet wine steps forward as an advocate. Onion softens in a small measure of butter for once. then listens to stock that remembers roasted bones from another season, then allows ground almonds to teach it how to cling without weight. Cinnamon and mace warm in a dry pan until curiosity rises. The warmth is rubbed through cloth into the sauce so no grit rings the lip of the spoon. The cook tastes, moves the pan the width of 2 fingers, tastes again, breathes, and sets the spoon aside. The decision is finished while the sauce still has a future. Trenchers stand in a clean row. The carver's knives lose the last memory of dust under a damp cloth. The order of service is a path everyone knows. Bread to begin. A course that respects the rule. A course that honors the purse. A quiet end that shows mercy to those who will still work when candles move toward ash. The buttery sends a jug that pours without froth. The pantry sends cloth that lies straight and flat, which is a form of speech everyone understands without translation. The calendar breathes while people forget to notice. On abstinence days, the boy with the yolk visits the well more often because almond milk drinks water. On festival days, the same yolk travels fewer times because richness condenses labor. On vigils and ember weeks, barley and greens stand taller on the list, and no one complains. The clerk notes it all in the same tidy hand, the hand that writes roasts in autumn when leaves drift into the yard, and the hand that writes salad when spring reminds the kitchen that the world changes under everyone's feet. A house that endures learns to make rhythm out of law. Afternoon turns toward the hall whether the day is lean or rich. On a lean day, platters carry fish that gleams under a coat only as thick as kindness. Greens wait nearby, kept honest by walnut and crumb, brightened by a prudent sour that lifts without shoving. A cold pottage, barley, herbs, a breath of oil, finds a table where a spoon can visit without leaving scars. On a rich day, the line grows deeper in color. Breads were the tone that calms a room. Sauces resemble parchment warmed by a lamp. A dish of fruit stands like a pause between thoughts, ready for its quiet walk to a table that will thank it and then forget it almost at once. The stair receives the procession in level steps. The sound on the treads is not skill showing off. It is steadiness doing its work. Between journeys to the hall, the kitchen invests in tomorrow. Salt fish soaks in a cool tub that remembers the river. A servant turns each piece once, then covers the water and writes a chalk mark on the tub so no one repeats the task and rushes the cure out of impatience. A pot for tomorrow's broth welcomes bones that gave their duty to today. Onion skins and leek greens join, not for flavor only, but for the color that pleases the eye when modest food reaches a bowl. In a corner where drafts do no harm, apples lie on straw and learn to keep their sweetness. The stems all point one way because order, even in a heap of fruit, prevents worry later. A crock accepts cabbage and salt for a slow conversation that will end in something brighter than the beginning. A wooden weight settles the matter without speech. The scullery starts the end while the day is still speaking. Vessels that knew oil see hot water first. Pans that knew almond milk follow. Boards where parsley left a green ghost come next. Sand does the work no cloth ever learns. Lie water closes the talk with that clean reply stone understands. Pegs receive clean ladles. Racks accept dry boards. A faint line of steam climbs the flue and then chooses the sky. The hearth lowers its voice on command. A log moves away from the mouth to consider the morning. The damper describes a new angle through the throat, and the room believes it. As evening leans on the windows, the steward performs the part that most people never notice and yet depend on with every mouthful. Ink records loaves by rank and weight, oil by the measured dip of the ladle, almonds by handful, turned into milk by basin and cloth, returned to meal by the same 2 hands. Fish counted not as trophies, but as duties fulfilled. Pepper advanced by a number so small the hand that wrote it could have lied and did not. The ledger closes like a person laying down to rest after keeping promises. Keys shift from palm to pouch. The chest for napery receives folded linen with a care that keeps the house from ever needing to raise its voice. The butler rocks a cask and hears that it can dream without worry. A slate near the door gathers tiny notes. Parsley at first light, greens before heat, river fish if weather forgives, save the almond meal for the bakehouse, open the spice chest only in the steward's shadow. If you ask why a visitor would not last a day under this rule, the answer stands in these rooms like warm air that refuses to brag. It is not simply the lift under a cauldron or the arm on a crank. It is memory that adjusts across weeks without complaint. It is almond turning to milk, then to sauce, then to order. It is greens arriving clean in cold water and leaving the pan as food that tastes like reason. It is fish meeting heat that neither bullies nor flatters. It is sugar treated like a guest who must be respected rather than a ruler who must be obeyed. It is spice measured by thought rather than by swagger. It is a ledger that speaks mercy in numbers and still matches what sits on the table. It is law turned into rhythm until rhythm becomes kindness. Night arrives without drama. The lamp near the ledger takes a trimmed wick and behaves. The hearth glows behind a cover of ash that remembers morning. The last basin tilts to dry. The last cloth hangs without a crease that would sour it. The corridor holds a ribbon of scent, bread, barley, a polite hint of wine on rich days, a ghost of vinegar on lean ones, and then thins out into the stair. The bell outside offers one final phrase. The kitchen answers by breathing. Tomorrow can come, because the room, obedient to rule and generous with patience, has finished what it started without hurrying a single step. The spit claims its hour with the calm authority of a bell, and iron answers by settling into the work that gives a kitchen its backbone. The roast is not a spectacle here. It is an agreement between weight, heat, and patience. Twine binds the joint with a pattern learned from elders who valued symmetry as much as seasoning. Loops pass under and over in even spacing so nothing sags and nothing dries. A sprig of rosemary is tucked beneath the binding, not for show but to scent the rising steam in a way that refuses to shout. The spit point enters cleanly, exits at the exact balance line, and receives a pair of skewers that cross like a quiet promise against slip. Below, the drip pan slides into its bay and takes a shallow bath of water with a spoon of verjuice, so what falls from above will not scorch, but will gather into base flavor for later. A hand tests the ladder of fuel one more time. Bright oak for edge, charcoal for steadiness, ash billets for the kind of warmth that stays polite. Then the crank finds its first slow revolutions. No one counts seconds. The turner keeps a rhythm by feel. 3 thoughts, a quarter turn, 3 more, another, a glance for color, a sniff for sweetness rather than smoke. This is the grammar of roast, and the room speaks it as if it were born to the tongue. Basting begins with a tool that looks simple and is not. A wisp broom of rosemary, thyme, and a thread of sage is tied to a handle with linen so it will not shed into the pan, and a little clay jar receives its share of the pan's first honest drippings. A splash of wine enters. A pinch of salt dissolves between finger and thumb. A breath of pepper waits at the rim until the steward nods. The brush travels in long strokes with the turn, never against, laying a thin mirror over the surface that will help color and keep moisture. Each pass leaves the herb's quiet perfume rather than a garden's shout. Now, and then a spoon lifts the pan and tips it a fraction so the corner catches what the center would waste. A clean cloth wipes the pan's lip so beads do not fall and scald the coals. A coal is pulled toward the edge to lend calm where the basting gathers. A billet is nudged in to replace an ancestor that did its duty and now becomes ash. The bellows breathe once, maybe twice, and withdraw before the flame grows vain. Everyone nearby listens for the sound that does not belong. A hiss should comfort, a crack should be brief, and silence should mean heat is holding steady. While the spit continues its slow sermon, the sauce bench gathers its papers. There is a sauce that respects cinnamon and calls itself cameline in some books. There is a green one that keeps company with parsley and mint, a mustard that knows vinegar, an almond sauce that owes its body to the morning's pressing. The clerk within the cook decides which voices today's table deserves. For the cameline, brown crumbs from a trimmed trencher are pounded with wine until they give and turn smooth. A pinch of cinnamon and a whisper of ginger follow, then a soft breath of clove if the steward allows it from the chest. The result moves to a small pan at the edge where warmth persuades rather than compels. A sieve removes any stubborn grit so the lip of the spoon meets silk, not sand. For green sauce, parsley leaves dry briefly in a cloth so tears will not thin the flavor. Then meet mint, sage, a little hyssop if the garden remembered, and a pour of verjuice. A mortar does what knives never quite manage, releasing oils without bitterness. Salt steadies the brightness, and the texture remains a rustic velvet on purpose. Mustard starts as a pile of seed that looks like it could roll away. The pestle insists otherwise, and vinegar is folded in until the paste wakes its nose. A thread of honey does not sweeten so much as round the edges a touch. All of these pots sit where heat is a companion. Each receives attention in turn. Each is asked to be enough without ambition. The almond sauce is a different temperament, formal and kind. Almond milk, pressed earlier until it ran like pale linen through the cloth, returns to the fire with a ladle of light stock. It thickens slowly as a spoon draws an infinity pattern that reaches corners and persuades the skin not to form. A few threads of saffron stained in warm liquid step into the pot almost shyly. The color shifts toward late afternoon. Salt and a pebble of sugar complete the voice so it can accompany fish on lean days or soften roasted fowl on rich days without pretending to be the star. The cook tests with a wooden spoon, then with a finger to feel the glide. The pot is moved a hand's breadth farther from the heart of flame because gentleness at the end preserves work made at the start. A clean ladle finds each sauce its own small pitcher, the spouts checked for a pour that neither coughs nor drips. Nothing spills, nothing begs. The basting brush rests in its jar and soaks. It will move again after 2 revolutions, not 1, because the last layer deserves time to join the surface. On a trivet set just outside the arc of heat, sops are made from yesterday's bread. Thick slices that kiss the pan's edge at intervals so the drippings will meet them and turn them into a modest luxury for the workers who never see the high table. The peel slides around to a cooling rack. Someone taps the base and listens for that hollow hymn that proves steam has completed its long talk inside the crumb. Every motion has company: fire with iron, roast with sop, sauce with spoon, bread with board. Nothing stands alone. Carving has rules that are older than appetite, and they begin long before the knife. When the roast leaves the spit, it does not meet the blade at once. It rests beneath a warm cloth, so juice travels inward and becomes agreement rather than running to the board like a startled guest. The carver's knives have already seen linen at noon. Now they see it again, just a gentle wipe against any dust carried by the hour. The carving board is set on a damp cloth to prevent a traveler's slide. A trencher waits near, because the first slices belong to the taster whose yes clears the way for the rest. The carver tests with a shallow touch to learn the grain's direction. He cuts across it to promise tenderness. The angle is shallow, the stroke long, the pressure even. Thin slices fall and arrange themselves in a line that looks like order, not display. A little salt completes each piece the moment it leaves the blade. A brushed ribbon of pan liquor glazes the surface. The platter receives the slices in a fan that shoos heat inward. At the edge, a pool of cameline stands ready with a small spoon. A second platter receives pieces dressed with green sauce. A third keeps its dignity with only the clear drip gathered in a ladle and a nod from the steward. Each plate wears enough and no more. From the sauce bench, the second set of tasks answers the first. The mortar and pestle are rinsed with warm water and a rub of coarse salt, then dried so the next flavor does not inherit what came before. The sieve is turned and tapped until the last drop is respected. No one scratches at it. Cloth has done its work, so threads remain whole for tomorrow. The small ladles are set on the rim of a warm basin, so the last sheen of sauce will not harden and crack. The lips of the pitchers are wiped with a cloth that leaves no lint. The spice chest is closed, the hasp set, the key returned, and a line goes into the ledger. Pepper advanced, cinnamon small, saffron a thread, clove a breath, ginger slept. These are not stabs at memory. They are the map by which the house knows whether it will still be able to speak its best words when winter leans on the windows and trade grows thin. If a visitor wonders why this work would outlast someone who thinks muscle is the only coin, the answer rises from the floor with the warmth. The turner's back holds a posture that's sparing pain tomorrow. The basting schedule is a conversation between heat and patience, not a chant of repetitions. The sauce maker's decisions are small but cumulative. When to move a pot 2 fingers outward, when to strain, when to trust texture as it stands. The carver stops before a slice becomes a shred. The steward records without liking or disliking, because numbers do not benefit from mood. Even the ash accepts its destiny with dignity. Sifted, it will wash boards later, and diluted, it will calm the sting of a fresh splinter. Every person, every tool, every pinch of seasoning is part of a method that would exhaust a guest long before the hour of service. The carry to the hall is quiet, because quiet helps balance the weight. Platters sit level in practiced hands. Sauce pitchers ride on a board under a towel to prevent shine and tragedy. At the stair, steps are taken as if the stone were listening. At the hatch, the taster receives a slice, touches it to his lip, and nods. The green sauce finds its way to those who enjoy its bright counsel. Cameline follows the pieces that go to a guest who favors warm spice. A plain slice and its drip nourish the worker who moved wood all morning and beds down rushes after sunset. The kitchen receives the empty board with the same care it gave the full one. Warm water, sand, lye, a cloth that knows how to leave no lint behind. Knives dry on a rack that drinks light from the hearth's tail. Before curfew declares itself, the spit is cooled and wiped. The skewers return to their drawer, and the basting brush is untied so the herbs can thank the day and go to the ash pit. The drip pan gets its rinse, then a true wash, then a moment of heat to drive away any wet that might invite rust. The trammels lower one by one with a soft chainsaw. The bellows lie on their side like a worker allowed to sleep well. The fuel stack gains one billet at the front, so the morning will not greet an empty mouth. The ledger closes with a final line. The lamp is trimmed and puts out a circle that looks like safety rather than show. And the hearth pulls a blanket of ash over its own red thought, so a seed of tomorrow will live without needing guard. If someone asked for a final sentence to describe why a person would not last a day in this chapter of the kitchen's life, it would be this. The roast is not a thing. It is the sum of tending. The sauce is not a trick. It is judgment poured from a spoon. The hearth is not a fire. It is a relationship kept in good standing through respect. And the room does not shout about any of it. It continues, one careful act after another, until evening carries the last warmth a little way into the night and leaves it there for morning to find. The larders are the castle's cool memory, and memory here is written in salt, stone, and order. A step inside changes the air, 1 degree lower, 1 note drier, a hush that comes from walls that drink the day and give nothing back in a hurry. Narrow slits high in the masonry take a careful breath from outside. Slate slabs hold a calm, even chill. Floor channels slope toward a trap drain so melt and brine leave the room without argument. Hooks ride an iron rail where carcasses once hung to learn patience. Racks carry baskets at a height that mice dislike. A cat with yellow eyes lies along a sill and pretends sleep while listening to everything that rustles. The door closes on a latch that sounds like a promise. Inside this silence, a whole house lasts from one season to the next. There is not one larder, but several, each with a job that makes sense when the year turns and markets wander. The wet larder keeps what lives in brine or its near cousin, tubs of salt fish under weighted lids, a ton of pickle where cucumbers and small onions surrender to vinegar until they learn a friendly bite, a row of earthen crocks where pears swim in syrup thick as patience. The dry larder keeps grain, pulses, and hard provisions. Sacks raised on trestles so damp cannot volunteer. Barrels chalked with dates and weights so hands remember to draw from yesterday before touching today. A meat larder, cooler and darker, holds cured flitches of bacon wrapped in cloth, hams that shine with the quiet sheen of fat, strings of sausages that have finished their long education in smoke and now wait for their lesson in the pan. A dairy corner shelters cheeses on oaken shelves rubbed with brine. Each wheel is turned by both hands so weight shares its duty. A cloth lies over a bowl where cream will become butter when the steward grants the hour. The herb loft above, reached by a short stair with a rail that remembers the oil of 100 palms, drowses under garlands of rosemary and thyme, savory and marjoram. Bundles hang head downward in a draft that does not blow, only thinks. Every space is named by its work, and everything inside those spaces becomes a sentence the body can read in winter. Counting governs everything. The pantler's ledger waits open on a narrow table polished by elbows rather than wax. The page holds columns that do not wander. Weight, date, use, remainder. A chalk mark on each barrel's head repeats the number for hands that come in hurried, because breath sometimes arrives before book. A notched tally sits beside the salt chest, so the measure that leaves in scoops returns as scratches that will later agree with ink. Nothing moves without reporting itself, not because the room distrusts people, but because the year itself can be a forgetful partner. When cured pork is lifted from its hook and brought to the light, a boy reads the old tag knotted to its twine. Month, day, salt house, the steward's initial, and then writes a new note before the knife, so that today will belong to someone's memory tomorrow. Spices live behind a second key. A casket opens under the eye of the clerk and closes before the smell has traveled to the door. Pepper is counted into a small cup. Saffron is teased in threads, never grabbed. Cinnamon is broken with a snap that sounds like a twig on a sunny lane. Clove and may sleep more often than they wake. Value prefers lids. The lids prefer names. Names prefer ink. The salt room is its own country. Along one wall, the great chest of bay salt stands like a low altar with its lid hinged in iron. When opened, light finds a landscape of pale crystals that drink air like a saint drinks prayer. Meat comes here to change itself, so the year cannot cancel it with a storm. A side of pork is packed in layers. Meat, salt, each lift bedded as carefully as sleeping children, spaces filled so no pocket of air can harbor a future complaint. A flat board rides the top layer, a stone rides the board, and the slow squeeze begins, the salt taking water, the meat trading weakness for endurance. After days counted by someone who respects numbers, the side rises from its cradle and receives a rub of fresh salt and a little brown sugar where the steward allows it. Pepper is pressed against the surface. Juniper may stand witness if the yard's trees have been generous. The meat moves from chest to airy hook. Each week it is turned and tapped. Each week a cloth damped in vinegar wipes the surface so mold will choose another wall to visit. Bacon flitches and linen learn to shine. Hams grow firm and answer a finger with a spring that speaks of safety. The book notes the change. The boy notes the weight. The hook notes nothing and does its job without opinion. Fish lives in salt as well, but with a different grammar. Herrings stack in their barrel with a rhythm older than the castle. Rows laid head to tail, bellies toward the staves, a lace of salt sewn between. A little brine poured along the edge, so every surface learns what the sea already knew. The lid closes under hoops that remember rain and sunshine both. When a barrel is broached, the butler takes a stave key and teases the hoop without violence. A wooden lever pries the head gently. A hand tests the brine. A nose reads the air. If the story is honest, a plank receives the draw and the ledger receives a line. Eels lie under damp cloth in their own company. Salmon comes by favor and leaves by slices. Small river fish soak briefly, then travel to the kitchen pan where oil and patience finish their thought. No one in this room believes that water and flesh can be told what to do by hurry. Salt is the teacher, time the classroom, cloth the chalk. Cheese prefers attentions that arrive like kind weather. Wheels rest on planks scrubbed with brine. A brush wakes the rind each morning so no stranger can take root. The wheel is turned so gravity will not choose sides. A cloth damped with vinegar wipes away any bloom that has ideas above its station. Fresh cheeses sit under gauze to avoid the conversation of flies. Older ones breathe with a calm regularity the hand can feel through the cloth. When the steward touches a rind, he does not prod, he reads. The dairymaid listens with her palms, and then she records, in the short book she keeps in her apron, what the larger ledger will later receive. Wool turned, rind brushed, cloth changed, shelf rubbed. Butter is a temperamental friend. The churn only moves when the room agrees to a cool hour. Little lumps of water are worked out with a paddle. Clean brine gives the butter its guard. A pad is wrapped in parchment and set upon a slate where shade nurses it toward the hour when a knife will not bruise its face. Eggs ask for more superstition than science and still repay exactness. A shallow tray carries them in rows, point downward so the pocket of air remains polite. Each shell is turned with a soft roll between fingers, once on market day and once in the middle of the week, so the yolk will not settle and sulk on one side. In a small alcove, a candle and a horn cup wait for candling. An egg passes before the flame and tells the truth of its freshness in the size of its shadow. Those with a doubtful look become the first to travel to paste or pastry. Those that claim perfection with too much confidence are put aside for the scullery and the dog. Some lords pay a glassman for a solution that holds eggs a little longer in lime water. This house trusts ash and straw and the clerk's eye. Each tray carries a slate with a chalk date and the name of the man who carried it in. If the number changes hands, the chalk changes too, because blame and praise prefer a human address. Vegetables and fruit sleep in intelligent heaps. Apples lie on straw with stems all pointing the same way. A late hand passes across the heap each morning and removes the one that sighs under its skin so it does not persuade others to despair. Pears prefer a cooler shelf and a watchful eye. Their moment of perfection is a narrower door than apples use, and someone must stand at that door each afternoon. Onions and garlic hang in plates from the beam, heads downward, tails braided, so air can walk among them, and mice must climb a rope with no reward. Cabbages sit with their faces toward the wall, large leaves still dressed against the world. A crock in a dark corner begins its slow miracle with shredded leaves and salt under a wooden weight. After a week, the nose knows the difference between rot and ferment and respects the latter. Herbs that traveled from the loft arrive in brown paper and leave in smaller numbers. A pinch wakes sauce. A palmful transforms pottage. The ledger reduces them to syllables and numbers and still fails to explain their magic. Pest discipline is part of the liturgy. The cat does more with a stare than most traps do with their springs. Where a line must be drawn, a wooden box trap waits, baited with a crumb and checked each hour. Prisoners ride far from the larder before they learn about the hawk. Laurel and mint hang against the wall for noses that wander. The drain holds water in its bend so air cannot bring the smell of the world below. Once a week a jug of hot vinegar walks that bend to remind it of manners. Hooks shine because a hand with a rag and a drop of oil walks the rail. A dull hook tears cloth and invites words no room should hear. Nothing in this place pretends that order happens by itself. Time, cloth, salt, slate, and small routines are the true carpenters. Work here moves by season and by sequence. In slaughter season, the meat larder learns abundance and then responsibility. Heavy sides arrive singing cold music and visit the salt in the right order. Inferior cuts for stew, bellies for bacon, hips for ham. A separate smoke room does its brown thinking with green wood refused and dry wood welcomed. Once smoke has finished its counsel, the meat returns to the larder to practice patience and clean air. In spring, the pickle tun wakes and cucumbers learn manners with dill and mustard seed. In summer, fruit cooks down under a modest fire and meets honey or sugar if the purse agrees. Jars learn to seal under wax, and the wax learns to lie flat without bubbles. Autumn sends grain in sacks that do not dare touch the floor. The head of each sack folds under itself and receives 2 stitches with twine so greedy hands cannot slip in with an easy excuse. Winter turns a stern face, and the larder smiles back because it has been rehearsing for this conversation all year. A day's inspection walks the room like a chant. The pantler carries a short staff to lift a cloth without using fingers and a narrow knife to scrape a rind that thinks itself clever. He moves from salt to brine, from hook to shelf, from barrel to basket. He presses a ham skin with the back of a knuckle and listens for a spring with purpose. He tests brine between finger and thumb and feels salt speak in little crystals. If the water seems timid, he feeds it a scoop. If it boasts, he draws a ladle and replaces it with water learned in the well. He turns each cheese that has earned the right to be turned today. He flips a chalk slate from open to closed. He mends a cloth with a single stitch rather than think about it tomorrow. He notes in the ledger what changed hands. So many onions to the kitchen, so many eggs to pastry, so many apples to the hall, 1 jar of pickles set aside for the buttery, 1 string of sausages promised to the watch. The page breathes when he is done, straight lines like planks in a well-made floor. Out of sight to anyone who only knows the hall, the larder also teaches mercy. A sack of grain split along a seam becomes meal for porridge rather than a complaint. The ledger notes the change, and no one is scolded. A cheese with a cracked rind goes to the kitchen where heat will forgive it. A sound will stands in its place and carries the honor forward. Trimmings from cured bacon travel to a pot that will feed the workers who lifted the cask. No part that can nourish is allowed to mourn. A jar whose wax seal shows a bubble becomes today's relish. The jar beside it receives a hand's regard and a line of chalk, so that tomorrow will not fall into the same trap. In this room, waste is not a sin shouted from a pulpit. It is an error corrected in quiet. By late afternoon, the day's draw is complete. Baskets stand in the corridor under a cloth, onions brushed free of skin, a cabbage with outer leaves intact, a fist of parsley, a handful of apples chosen by thumb and forefinger, a packet from the spice chest recorded by the clerk, a small jar from the pickle tun sealed again with wax softened over a candle, a wheel of cheese wiped and turned, a pat of butter wrapped and marked, a string of sausages coiled like a tidy rope. The steward reads the basket the way a physician reads a pulse and signs the slate with a blunt pencil that leaves a line as modest as his face. The door closes. The latch makes its quiet word. The room exhales through the vent and then resumes its long willingness to wait. If you ask why a visitor would not last a day here, the answer does not dress itself as drama. It wears linen and smells faintly of vinegar and oak. It is the patience of salt learning to say enough, but not too much. It is the habit of turning what must be turned and leaving still what must be still. It is the weight of numbers that must agree with slates and bellies and shelves. It is the refusal to trust memory when chalk and ink can do the work. It is the way a hand can read a rind and hear a barrel and feel brine between finger and thumb. It is the mercy that moves a cracked will toward heat and a sound will toward pride. It is the discipline that keeps cats sleepy and hooks bright, drains honest and cloths clean. By the time the bell outside folds the hour into evening, the larders have finished their part without clamor, and the kitchen can cook boldly knowing the winter is already answered. The corridor brightens as a runner carries the basket upward to the places where candles will turn nourishment into ceremony. The pantler closes the ledger and wipes the slate ends of his tally stick. The cat yawns and remembers that night belongs to her. A last look touches the salt chest, the cheese shelf, the barrel hoops, the hooks along the beam. All reply with the kind of silence that means yes. The door gives its latch a final word. Stone keeps its cool. And the castle, fed by rooms that learned how to hold time in their hands, leans toward the hour when dishes will travel out and empty boards will return, and the day will discover that memory, salted and measured, is a kind of wealth that lets a house sleep. The hall does not awaken with music. It gathers itself like stone learning to breathe. Trestles are carried from the storeroom and laid as if measuring the room with patience. Boards set upon them, so they lie level, no wobble, no complaint. Linen follows, broad lengths rolled from the chest in the pantry, shaken once in the corridor to let the dust resign its post, then smoothed by palms from center to edge until every crease agrees to lie down. A great salt, carved and lidded, is placed upon the high table as if drawing a line through the meal. Above it, ceremony. Below it, honest appetite. Pewter gleams with a modest light. Knives are set where rank expects them. Spoons wait where custom allows. Trenchers of yesterday's bread form a quiet army along the boards, each one the size of a steady hand. At the far end, near the door, baskets for crumbs and bones appear, so the floor will not carry stories it never asked to hear. A single ewer and basin rest near the dais for the washing of hands, and a second pair travels down the room, so no guest begins without the small courtesy of clean water. While a runner climbs the stair to tell the steward that the hall can bear witnesses, the buttery sends its first jug on a sling. Small beer drawn clear, jostle avoided by a carrier who knows how to walk through a crowd as if he were alone. The pantler's boys arrive with boards cloaked in linen and bearing trenchers, each board balanced upon a shoulder, elbows straight, faces blank in concentration that has nothing to prove. Ushers rehearse the line through the tables, stepping off the path from hatch to high table and back again until feet remember. The sewer, the officer who arranges service, tests the width between trestles with his staff, then nods, and the hall waits. There is a breathing pause, and in the kitchen below a bell answers the one above with a single calm note. What happens next looks simple. It is not simple at all. Hand washing opens the meal. The ewer lifts the jug in both hands, pours a slow measure over the steward's fingers, then over the guests at the high table, and the water falls into a basin that catches more than liquid. It catches the promise that no labor from outside will follow anyone to their plate. Linen towels travel along the rail of arms, clean cloth against clean skin, and the hall exhales in one long ribbon as people settle to their places. A chaplain or clerk speaks a grace that you could almost miss if you wished to miss it, and yet the words tilt the hour toward order. The salt is uncovered. The first basket of bread arrives at the high table, and a knife with a narrow, shining face shares pieces with a care that signals the tone for everyone watching. The first course travels with level shoulders. From the hatch at the lower end of the hall, bearers step into the light with platters that do not sway. The sewer ahead of them depart the air and keep elbows from learning panic. Platters do not land. They are offered. A taster receives the first bite at the side, in sight of the dais, but not at its elbow. Approval is given with a small word, or simply with the absence of any word that would halt the room. The sewer indicates where each dish belongs. Upper board first, then along the tables by rank. Messes of foresharing from trenches and bowls as custom decides. A boy follows with a basket of knives for those who did not bring their own, and another with spoons laid along a cloth, so metal will not ring upon metal like an argument. The buttery's men govern thirst with a composed hand, the lip of each jug tipped only as far as needed, the stream steady, the surface of the drink returning to stillness as if nothing had visited it. Conversation never quite becomes noise. The hall hums, but beneath the hum lies a grid of movement that would wear out a guest who tried to imitate it. A runner crosses from the pantry with a board of trenchers for a lower table, slides two with a practiced wrist, collects two that have given their crumb and shape to gravy, and pivots back toward the hatch without looking over a shoulder. A bearer positions a platter so the ladle's handle faces the hand most likely to use it. A second bearer lowers a dish at the exact breath when the first dish is half emptied, so no one notices the change. At intervals, the ewerer returns with warm water to collect fingers from the work of eating and persuade them to begin again as if the hour had just started. Crumbs are brushed into baskets. Bones walk away under cloth. The floor remains a citizen rather than an accident. Carving is a language of its own, and the hall understands it without being taught. At the high board, the carver stands with a linen at his shoulder and a steady blade that loves angles more than force. He reads the grain, sets the knife across it, and draws slices that lie upon themselves like pages of a book. Each thin piece receives a pinch of salt and a glisten of liquor from the pan, then travels to the trenchers in a fan that moves inward to shelter warmth. The sewer chooses which sauce walks with which meat. A green note for brightness at the edge. A warm, spiced ribbon where the day has granted such indulgence. A plain drip for the guest who trusts the roast to speak on its own. No one announces these decisions. The decisions declare themselves the moment the spoon falls silent. Between courses, the hall performs a small reset that almost no one sees happen. The Pantler's boys exchange trenchers that have borne too much for trenchers that still can shoulder a second hour. A new cloth appears where an accident tried to invent a stain. The buttery's men change a jug that thinks too highly of its froth for one that knows how to lie flat in the cup. Fruit may walk among the tables. Apples that have slept on straw. Pears caught at the narrowest door of ripeness. Offered from shallow baskets, so hands understand they are to choose one and not three. If the calendar is merciful and the purse has felt generous, wafers from the iron, rolled and perfumed with rose or honey, will visit the upper board as a pause rather than a proclamation. In any case, the sewer's staff touches the floor once, and bearers in the corridor adjust their breathing to a fresh line of tasks. The second course takes its cue from the first. Pottage that has thickened to a dignified body rides out in bowls with rims wide enough for fingers to respect them. Fish on abstinent days glows under a thin coat that remembers the pan without carrying its smoke. On richer days, slices of meat rest with a measure of sauce that knows how to accompany without drowning. Baskets of bread, new loaves cut for slices now that the earlier trenchers have done their work, move down the tables. At a lower board, a worker who spent the morning lifting wood meets a thick slice of bread that has taken the flavor of the pan. The expression on his face is not newsworthy and not forgettable. At the upper board, a guest raises an eyebrow at cinnamon and then allows it to make sense. The hall does not insist that every person feel the same thing. It merely offers what the day and the larders and the fire have agreed to offer. What outsiders remember as spectacle is, in fact, administration assisted by grace. The usher at the door admits latecomers with a glance at rank, then folds them into places that will not offend the invisible mathematics of the room. The almoner visits the outer edge to collect the portions set aside by custom for those beyond the castle wall. Bread, a ladle of pottage, perhaps a slice, all wrapped in thought rather than in paper. A clerk moves quietly with the steward's tablet and notes which barrel is drawing more quickly than forecast, which table requires an extra board of bread, which sauce pitcher should not attempt another lap without relief. None of this interrupts anyone's mouthful. None of it aspires to applause. Toward the end, the hall thins its appetite and remembers manners that signal closure. The ewer returns for one last wash. Water over fingers that now shine with a labor someone else did on their behalf. A sober wine may visit the upper board in little cups to mark that the meal has crossed its river. A handful of spices, grains of paradise, a twist of candied peel, might pass with the wafers if the day is festive. If it is not, a quieter end is chosen, and the room approves with silence. A soft grace closes the arc that the opening grace began. Chairs slide back, linen rests, knives return to sheaths. Voices embrace the change from eating to rising. When the last platter has turned into a clean circle again, the hall performs a vanishing act with no magician. Boards lift in order, crumbs traveling to baskets rather than to floor. Linen rolls upon itself, edge to edge, like a tide pulling back from a shore. Trestles fold to the wall and stand in ranks that look like the memory of tables rather than their absence. The buttery's crew carries jugs down the stair and rinses them before Oak can drink a stain. The pantler counts trenchers and sends the tired ones to the scullery to become broth and porridge tomorrow, their service extended through transformation rather than waste. A broom makes a long, deliberate path down the center. Rushes agree to lie where they were asked to lie. The air changes from food to stone again. Why would someone not last a day within this hour of the castle's life? Because nothing here relies on muscle alone. Every motion is part of a lattice. The angle of a platter so a ladle can find its handle. The pace of the jug so the cup accepts and rests. The distance between trestles so a bearer can pass without hesitation. The moment a cloth appears so embarrassment never learns to speak. The mind keeps time while the hand carries weight. The eye reads rank while the mouth speaks courtesy. The ear hears the difference between welcome sound and warning sound. And under all of it, a promise is being fulfilled without announcement. Those who came hungry leave satisfied. Those who serve return with shoulders that still know their names. The room, cleared and folded, is ready to dream of the next meal without anxiety. The steward makes a final walk from dais to door, fingers grazing the linen chest, the salt, the latch. The ewer tips a last cup into the basin and dries the lip. The usher opens the door to the corridor and lets the smell drift upward to the stair where it dissolves into stone. The bell outside offers a phrase that may as well be thank you. In the kitchen below, pans breathe out and benches breathe in. In the buttery, hoops settle a fraction along their staves. In the pantry, a cloth over bread decides to nap. The hall, relieved of weight and sound, becomes space again, a space that remembers, without boasting, the thousand small choices it took to feed a house without hurry, without spectacle, and with a dignity that lasts longer than any single plate. The bakehouse holds its own weather. Stone curves over heat like a palm over a candle, and the air rests a little warmer than the kitchen, warmer in a way that feels organized rather than loud. The dome of the oven stores yesterday's fire inside its clay memory, and today it will be persuaded to the right temper by steps that were old when the castle was young. Doors are opened to let out the old smell and invite in new breath. A broom made from birch twigs sweeps the floor so ash will not write its name on bread. The baker listens to the room the way a miller listens to river water. He knows what the bricks mean when they darken and then lighten again, and he knows the sound of the peel when it kisses the hearthstone, a dry, polite sound that never asks for attention and always gets it. Heat must be raised with sense, not with bravado. A ladder of kindling is laid so air can walk among the slats. Twigs go first, then thin splits, then billets that will give a long, even glow. A twist of straw accepts flame at the door and walks it inward, not thrown, not hurled, just ushered. The mouth is half closed. The draw is tested by holding a feather at the throat and watching which way it bows. When the fire takes hold, the oven speaks in colors. Black stone becomes maroon, then brown, then a pale shade that tells the baker the pores have opened. He scatters a pinch of flour at the back wall. It blooms to gold and then to a shade of harvest. Not yet, he says to no one. When the tongue of flame has done its purpose, the heap is spread with an iron rake into a bright low field, then pulled into the ash pit with slow strokes that leave a skin of heat upon the floor. The baker drags a damp mop along the bricks, a cloth bound to a handle long enough to reach the deep curve. Steam walks ahead of the cloth and then fades. The floor shines a little and then stops shining. Now the hearth is clean, hot, and ready to write crust. Flour in this room has a family history. Fine manchet meal, sifted through bolting cloth, sits for the Lord's table. Maslin, a marriage of wheat and rye, waits for the household. Coarser dredge with bran intact stands ready for workers who value strength over elegance. Leaven has slept since dusk, a sponge of ale barm and last bake's dough, smiling under its cloth as if it had found something out and chosen not to boast. Salt is rubbed smaller, so it will fold without sharpness. Water is drawn tepid, so it will persuade rather than startle. Hands enter the bowl, and the bowl ceases to be a vessel and becomes a shore. Fold, press, turn, rest, a tide in the wrist that travels into gluten and teaches it to behave. The dough reaches the moment when it moves as one body, neither sticky nor sulky, when the palm sees a smooth skin and the finger finds a spring that answers and then forgets the finger was there. The mass is covered and left while the oven remembers its balance. Shaping begins with a conversation between weight and purpose. The scale tilts, steadies, and grants equal pieces to a bench dusted with a cloth of flour. Rounds are cupped and tucked so the surface tightens, then set seam down to breathe while the bench learns their names. Long loaves are rolled with the flats of the hands, ends tapered just a little, a gesture of courtesy, not of fashion. Brown rounds for the garrison receive a deeper form, a belly that will carry pottage without surrender. Fine manchet is turned under and set into linen-lined baskets, each lined with a close weave that will give the dough a gentle pattern when it rises. A blunt reed makes the baker's mark on each piece, dots and lines that answer the stewards need to count and the laws need to trust weight. No two households in the village share a mark. In the hall, a slice can return to its parent by reading the crust. The peel lies near, dusted and calm. A boy stands at the table and watches the baker's hands, because no book can teach what palms know. Loading is a measured dance. The peel slides under the first round with a long, level motion, body and tool act as one line. The oven mouth opens fully, and the room inhales warm breath that smells like river stones and a morning that has gone well. The first loaf lands at the back, then a partner beside it with space enough for air to work. The peel withdraws in a single glide, the baker turning his wrist as if finishing a sentence. Rounds follow in a spiral, each with its breathing room. Long loaves fill the straight edge by the door, so their slashes will not argue with a neighbor. A plug, part clay and part wattle, narrows the mouth and trains the draft. The baker listens in the quiet that follows. No crack should be loud, no hiss should be sour. Flour blooms against the stone where the peel touched. That mark will soon vanish as the bricks speak their heat into the dough. While bread writes its poem against the hearth, the bench does not sleep. Coffins for raised pies are started in a different bowl, a hot water paste that tolerates walls and lids. Fat melts into water and then meets flour. A spoon and then fingers coax it into a dough that holds a shape without show. A wooden form, a foot, stands on the board. Paste is pressed around it with the heel of the hand until a cylinder rises, as honest as a cooper's cask, smooth, tall, without tears. The foot slips free. A thumb marks a small bead along the rim. The case waits under a cloth. Later it will be filled with well-seasoned meat or fish, the lid crimped, a steam vent cut, a sprig brave at the top like a banner that knows what it stands for. Today, some coffins will travel to the oven after bread has had its share, because falling heat favors pastry. It bakes gently, and gentle is the friend of walls that need time to set. The oven speaks again, this time in color and scent. The baker lifts the plug, narrows his eyes, and reads the arc of brown from lip to back. A round near the rear holds a shade like barley in late afternoon. He taps the base with a knuckle and hears the dry, hollow hum that tells him steam has done its work in the crumb. He gains the first loaf with a half turn of the peel and draws it forward. The crust whispers as cooler air finds it. The second follows, and the third. A rack receives them, slatted to let the air travel around the heels. Coarser loaves linger another minute. Fine manchet returns to the bench and sits under a cloth so the shine will not harden too soon. Along the side wall, where the heat is lower by a respectful measure, a row of small muffins in iron rings turns from pale to gold. A boy lifts a ring and hears a soft, clean sigh, then replaces it with a patience that his shoulders are still learning. Now the oven enters its second service, the hour when falling heat becomes a gentle companion. Custards in earthen pots take the back row where warmth is even and polite. The skin will form like parchment if someone does not stir at the right moment. So a spoon visits each pot once, then once again, then waits. The raised pies stand along the left, their lids pricked with a cross that will let steam leave without drama. A tray of apples sits along the front edge, cored and filled with a small spoon of almond paste and a dab of honey. They will slouch a little and sweeten the air. A tray of simnels or spice buns visits for a brief stay if the calendar smiles. Their tops will wear a tiny snowfall of flour that melted and then remembered itself. The baker measures these things with a clock no one can see. He moves one step, then another, and his steps add minutes to each dish without any need for numbers. When the peel glides, it glides as if finishing a thought. Between pulls the bakehouse writes in tidy lines. Loaves cool on boards in ranks that resemble patience given shape. A knife that met the strop in the morning draws one trial slice through a round so the steward can judge the crumb. Holes present themselves in even small sizes, neither tight nor gaping. The slice returns to its parent, and the cut face is veiled so air does not steal moisture for vanity. A brush flicks flour from the bench. A chalk mark finds the slate beside the door. First bake drawn, second bake entering, pies in, custards in, apples in, buns next. A boy runs the line to the kitchen and the hall, reads it aloud, nods, and forgets that he nodded. The oven mouth is narrowed again, and the room returns to its listening. Marks matter, and not only for pride. The assize of bread sleeps in the steward's mind even when no official enters the yard. Weight must meet price. If wheat has journeyed dearly this month, the loaf may be a fraction smaller, and the mark tells that truth without shame. A board by the door holds the day's notice, written in a hand that respects numbers more than flourish. The village baker may be a mile beyond the gate, but this room honors the same rule. A house that feeds many cannot lie to its own book. When rounds for the garrison are counted onto a cart, the steward reads the marks as readily as a clerk reads sums. When trenchers for the hall travel under linen, a skewer has pricked a sign on each base that will keep their story straight from oven to mouth. Order is not decoration. It is the sound a room makes when it intends to last. There is a mercy in this room as well. Rounds that cooled too near the door and lost a little strength at the edge will be diced for sops, to carry broth to workers whose mornings began before the bell thought of speaking. Ends that dried more than they should join the ale posset later, where heat and milk will forgive them. Bran brushed from bolting cloth travels to the scullery for scrub, then returns in a different holiness as clean boards that never touch grit with the mouth. Even ash from the first fire has a second purpose. Mixed with water, it will become lye that smooths grease from a pie mold and grants it dignity again. Waste is not scolded here. It is taught to find a new task. By late day, The bakehouse lifts its hand from labor and shows what it has made. Baskets for the hull hold rounds that promise a gentle break under the knife and a crumb that will take sauce without drowning. Trays for servants carry long loaves with crust that will stand up to a hungry hand. Pies cool until their walls will stand travel. A small funnel enters each lid and receives a spoon of clear jelly to fill the hollows that baking always creates. A quiet craft that keeps meat moist for days. Custards find the cool shelf and go still. Apples sit in their tray, smelling like a kind evening. The bench is wiped with the long stroke that signals completion rather than pause. The fire mouth learns to sleep with a blanket of ash drawn over the faint red that decides to remain. The door is set on its bar, not to exclude air, but to invite quiet. If you ask why a visitor would not last through a day here, the answer lies in this long, exact patience. Heat must be read without a dial. Flour must be judged by hand more than by eye. Leaven must be trusted even while it is hidden under cloth. Loading asks for a body that remembers angles, spacing, and the value of silence. The second service asks for a mind that can hold three kinds of warmth at once and offer each dish its proper path. Marks must be made and remembered. Weights must agree with coin. Waste must find new lives. And through all of it, the room asks for the same thing the dough asks for. Steady work in one direction, without hurry, without vanity, until the crust sings and the crumb explains the day better than any speech. Evening leans at the lintel. The racks give off a faint murmur as cooling loaves surrender steam to the air. The baker lays a palm against the dome and reads tomorrow in the warmth stored there. The peel returns to its peg. The mop hangs where it will dry without souring. The slate keeps its chalk marks like a diary that does not gossip. Outside, the corridor smells of bread and a hint of apple. Down the stair, a boy carries a basket level enough to honor the hours that made it heavy. The bell says a last plain phrase to the yard. The bakehouse answers without words, a kind of glow that lives in brick and patience, and then the room remembers how to wait. The scullery is the castle's second river. Everything that fed the day returns here to be made harmless, useful, and quiet again. The door opens to warmth that is not dramatic, only steady, and to light that finds steam and turns it to a small silver weather. Benches run along the walls like low keys. A row of basins sits ready at different heats. Hooks hold cloths that have earned their baths and will soon earn them again. A hearth of its own murmurs at the end of the room, where kettles pant gently and a blackened copper keeps a shy boil for lie. Floor channels slope toward a trapped drain so that water, ash, and sand know where to travel, and rushes underfoot are brushed to lie in one direction so grit walks out rather than inward. It is not glamour, it is rescue. If the kitchen is speech, the scullery is punctuation, the marks that make sense of what was said. Order begins long before a pot touches water. Trays arrive from the hall and the bakehouse, and each is sorted with a discipline that prevents quarrels among materials. Pewter to one side, iron to another, copper by itself, knives and edge tools under a clean cloth, wooden bowls and trenchers in a neat stack, boards propped so air can move. Bones and scraps find a pail bound for the swineyard or the almoner's pot, while rags and twine go to a basket that will grant them one more life as firelighters when they are no longer worth a patch. Grease is not invited to wander. A scraper removes the worst of it into a crock set aside for tallow rendering, and only then is a vessel allowed to approach a basin. A clerk would recognize the mind at work, heavier to the rear, delicate where hands will not bump them, every piece with a place that remembers its name. Heat is the first ingredient in cleanliness, and it is curated, not flung. Kettles lift a calm simmer for the basins that wash, a quicker breath for the tub that rinses, and a whisper for the pot that melts ash into lye. The ash comes from a barrel that belongs only to this room, sifted yesterday through a riddle until it was as fine as good manners. and the scoop that measures it has a notch to prevent generous moods from turning tomorrow mean. The lye pot is stirred with a stick that is never used for anything else. A drop on the back of a spoon tells the strength by feel rather than by numbers, and when it is right, a ladle speaks to the first basin, raising the water from warm to willing. Vinegar stands nearby for copper and for hands. Sand waits in a tub for boards and for the bottom of pans. A round of pumice hangs in a string for stains that believe in themselves. The scullion's apron is tied high. Sleeves are bound. A cloth covers hair. This is not vanity. It is respect for the work. The washing has a grammar that never changes because it never needs to. What is first, before any grease has a chance to boast? Trenchers are dipped in clear hot water, briskly brushed with sand, rinsed, and set upright on racks that drink air along the wall. Boards are scrubbed with sand and lie together, rinse water running along their grain rather than against it, then dried by hand so timber does not warp under a lazy drip. Bowls receive the same plan, and the cloths that wipe them are changed while still honest rather than after they begin to lie. Now pewter takes its turn, meeting lye where necessary, clear water where not. Pieces are swillied, stroked with a soft pad, then rubbed with a hint of whiting until they decide to be a mirror for other people's pride. Copper is bathed in hot water sweetened with vinegar and salt. Stains surrender with a sigh. A final rinse clears the metal of bite, and a soft cloth draws away what so no green will dream on the surface later. Iron waits. It always waits, because it asks for patience and returns it kindly. Iron work begins with a scrape rather than a soak, the way a quarrel begins to end when someone chooses not to raise a voice. A spatula of oak persuades the last film of fat from a pan. Sand and a breath of lye follow. The scullion's hands move not in circles that make pride, but in lines that make sense. Rinse water scalds, then leaves at once. Heat returns in the form of a short visit to the hearth, so that pans dry by warmth rather than by air, and a cloth dressed with a whisper of clean grease glides across the surface while it is still warm, leaving behind a protection that will read as flavor tomorrow. The gridiron, the ladles, the skewers, each meets its sentence of sand, water, heat, and a kindness of oil. Then they hang where moving air can finish what fire began. Rust does not win arguments in this room. It is never allowed to begin them. Knives are judged with a different eye. They do not bathe. They are cleaned. Blades are wiped with hot water and a cloth that tells no lies, dried at once, and introduced to the strop for 3 strokes that teach the edge to remember dignity rather than vanity. When a blade asks for more, the whetstone comes out of its box like a book that has been read by 3 generations. The stone drinks a mouth of water. The edge lies to it at a familiar angle, and strokes move in a patient rhythm from heel to tip, both sides visited until the sound of the blade on the stone changes from needy to sure. The spine sees a cloth. A dot of oil visits the hinge of a folding knife. The handle returns to a condition that will not trouble the palm. Knives in this house do work. Knives in this house do not fight. Glass is rare and therefore waits for hands that know reverence. A basin of clear warm water receives it without lie. A breath of vinegar grants brightness, and fingers act like thoughts rather than like tools. Each piece is dried with linen that never saw a board or a pan. Each is held to the light, and then sent to a shelf where air can visit, but lips will not until evening. Earthenware tolerates more persuasion. Glazes ask for gentleness when they are young, but old pots accept sand against the unglazed foot and come away better for it. Anything cracked becomes a servant to plants or to grain and is retired from heat. The ledger gets a line, and the cook loses no sleep. The scullery does not forget the world beyond basins. Cloths travel in procession to the laundry. Those that touched lye are rinsed. Those that met vinegar are rinsed again. Those that saw grease rest in a tub with a measure of ash water before they yield to the stones and the sun. Mops are wrung until they stop lying. Brooms are shaken in the yard so rush seeds return to earth rather than build a garden beneath the table. Slops go down the trapped drain. Bones that cannot become broth visit the swine after the almoner looks into the pail. Any smell that decides to linger meets hot vinegar, and vinegar, as always, persuades without needing help. The cat does an inspection that is half play and half law. A box trap along the far wall answers once in a week and not more, which is the ratio that tells you the room loves order rather than war. Inventory belongs here as surely as water does. A pegboard near the door carries silhouettes that show where each ladle, skimmer, and peel sleeps. A glance reveals which hand forgot to return which friend. The steward's slate lists vessels in their ranks: pans, pots, kettles, lids, and a dot appears by any that are out on duty. When the dot lingers too long, someone asks the right question without any heat in the voice. A spare ring for the wafer iron lives in a pouch so small it would vanish if not for habit. The pouch lives in a drawer whose handle feels different from the others, so a sleepy boy can still find it without waking the whole room. Hooks are rubbed with oil, hinges tested, the drain's water seal is renewed. The firebrick at the scullery hearth gets a sweep of ash that will make tomorrow's fire begin more readily. Nothing is idle here, even when nothing seems to be happening. Polish returns the room to a condition that invites mourning rather than resists it. Pewter receives a final soft cloth. Copper receives a breath of flour and vinegar mixed to a paste, then another cloth to erase the memory of the paste. The long bench gets a rinse, then a wipe. The ends are lifted so water does not dream beneath the feet. Basins empty in the right order, worst to best, so clarity is not wasted on grease. Racks shine with the thin gloss that would shows when it has been rubbed with honesty. The floor receives a walk with a stiff brush, then a gentle mop that knows how to leave almost nothing behind. Rushes are lifted and renewed where a path grew thin. The broom rests against the wall in a posture that looks like readiness rather than fatigue. Toward evening, the scullery becomes a chapel of small sounds. Drips finish their sentences and fall silent. A kettle sighs and accepts a hook. Cloths whisper as they are hung in lines that leave space between them, because air is a servant you do not see and you must still respect. The drain offers back a clean breath instead of a complaint, which proves the trap is doing the work it was born to do. A hand passes over the rack of knives without touching any, reading the room the way a gardener reads a hedge. All is in its place, and therefore thought can rest. A key lifts from a nail, rides to a chest, returns, and finds its nail again with the faint click that sounds like a promise. If someone asked why a visitor would not last a day in this room, the answer would not be a speech. It would be a list of motions that seem small and turn out to be a doctrine. Scrape before soak, wash along the grain, dry by warmth, not by guessing, oil iron while it still remembers heat, sharpen only until the stone changes tone, rinse a cloth while it is still telling the truth, separate metals as if peace depended on it, invite vinegar to speak when odor tries to argue, treat ash as a recipe rather than as trash, place every tool where a hand can find it in the dark. None of it dazzles, all of it endures. The day in the kitchen above can be generous because the day down here is exact. Curfew comes as an instruction, not a surprise. The scullion banks the small hearth with ash so a seed of warmth will live until dawn. Basins are turned so their rims face the room, which means water will not gather in the night and invent a stain. The last light shows a surface that refuses reflection because it is honest, not because it is dull. The door closes with the latch that says the room is safe to leave. In the corridor, the air tastes faintly of vinegar and grain and clean iron. On the far wall, a shadow of steam gives up and becomes nothing. And inside, the scullery ends its hymn with the line it always sings. Everything that served has been restored. Everything that erred has been corrected, and everything that will be needed again has been placed where morning will find it without asking. The bell gives its evening phrase. One clear note that seems to land on every pan, peg, and page, and the castle folds itself smaller. Curfew is not a panic. It is housekeeping for the dark, curfew, a cover laid over flame so the night can pass without argument. In the kitchen, the great hearth lowers its voice. A shovel draws embers inward, then spreads a quilt of sifted ash across the red thought of the fire. The damper is set to the familiar line the steward could draw with his eyes closed. Trammels come down link by link, their iron song muted in a cloth. The bellows are turned on their side, so leather sleeps without strain. A narrow-lipped jug waits by the embers for the one ambitious coal that may forget its manners. Nothing is hurried. Heat is not dismissed. It is persuaded to dream rather than roam. The larders receive good night in a circuit that looks like prayer. The pantler walks with a short staff to lift cloths without warming what must remain cool, and a neat knife to discipline a rind that thinks too well of itself. Hooks are counted by the eye. Each either bears weight or stands politely empty, and either state becomes ink. The basalt chest closes with the soft, sealing thud of a sentence that has finally found its verb. Brine is tasted at the barrel head. If it speaks faintly, a scoop of salt replies. If it speaks too boldly, a ladle of well water persuades it to manners. Bacon flitches are turned so gravity cannot make mischief. Hams are tapped for a spring with purpose. Vinegar cloths are folded for mourning. Cheeses are brushed and rolled with both hands so weight shares its duty. Eggs are given their slow half-turn in the trays, points down, then candled against a horn cup to read the shadow of honesty. Chalk advances the date by one neat mark. A slate at the door flips from open to closed with a small, satisfying click. The cat patrols the low shelves with a look that forgives nothing and approves everything done correctly. Keys have their own language at this hour. The steward's ring hangs heavy enough to refuse jokes. Pantry, buttery, spice casket, bakehouse, larder. Teeth he can read with his fingertips. Doors are closed in the order that prevents tomorrow's arguments. First the rooms that recruit smells, then the rooms that tempt coin. The spice chest receives a wafer of warm wax and the signet that never changes, not because anyone expects mischief, but because a house that lasts does not ask trust to do work that ink and wax can do. At the table where numbers become memory, the ledger draws its last lines. Loaves returned, jugs rinsed, weights balanced, sauces accounted, knives tallied by number and by feel. A note beside pepper that reads a breath, not a pinch. The quill drinks, shakes, and sleeps. A palm smooths the drying page. No smear, no flourish, only promise kept. Down in the scullery, water keeps its own clock after bells are done. Basins empty in the sensible order, worst to best, so clarity is not wasted on grease. Boards lean with faces to the air, not to the wall, so what does not learn to hide? Iron dries by warmth, not by guessing. While it still remembers heat, a cloth dressed with the faintest breath of clean fat travels the surface, leaving tomorrow's first minutes guarded from rust. Blades are wiped, stropped, and set spine out where the morning hand will find them without looking. Cloths climb to their pegs with space between them because air is the servant you never see and must always respect. The trapped drain offers back a clean breath. A jug of hot vinegar walks the bend and leaves civility behind. Sand in its tub is raked smooth. A small, tidy landscape that means ready. On the laundry slate, ash lie first, river if clear, sun if mercy. The words look like chores and behave like kindness. Outside, the yard finishes its arithmetic. Ash goes to its lean-to and takes a cover against the dew. Rubbish that can feed swine goes one way. What cannot is buried or burned where the wind agrees to the plan. The midden receives a thin coat of straw so smell and flies resign their office until earliest light. The well is capped against leaves and bright ideas. Trench boards are set if rain talks in the dark, if frost promises a white dawn, The baker stacks 2 billets near the oven mouth and turns the mop head to dry on the bakehouse wall. A broom writes one long line at the threshold so Mud understands it has no invitation. The dog under the bench arranges paws in a way that means the first half of the night belongs to him. Somewhere beyond the gate a watchman's step says Stone and Moon are on speaking terms. Now comes tomorrow's seed, the work most visitors never see and could not carry. A bowl receives warm water. A spoon of ale barm wakes. A pinch of salt and a thumb of yesterday's leaven join. A soft sponge begins to smile under its cloth. This is not bread. It is permission for bread to exist in the morning. Beans slip into a tub and accept their overnight water without complaint. Barley is rinsed and set where drafts cannot turn kindness into chill. A small sheaf of onions is peeled just enough to spend less time at dawn. Their skins go to the pot that will give tomorrow's broth its proper color. A twist of saffron sleeps in a paper folded twice and tucked into the spice casket's shadow. A note reminds the cook that tomorrow is lean and almond will stand where butter would. Chalk writes the modest scripture of dawn on the kitchen slate. Greens first, barley early, salt fish draw, almond milk press, heat to manch it, fall to coffins. 5 short lines, a page of anxiety saved. The buttery teaches casks how to sleep. Hoops get a knuckles tap. Any stave that answers with a question receives a wedge beneath its, but so weight settles square. Jugs are left a finger ajar, so damp cannot teach new tricks in the dark. Sling ropes are coiled and hung where tired hands will find them without thinking. A chalk moon is drawn on the heads of the barrels that will be drawn at first light. A private signal that straightens the morning's walk. The washing pans are stacked lip to rim, so no mouth kisses another in the night. A single ewer is filled and veiled for the first hand washing at the hall. The butler notes small beer steady, ale modest, wine untouched, then closes his book like a man who has stopped 3 quarrels no one else will ever hear about. Candles and rushlights keep their own curfew. The tallow pot, skimmed of scum, cools with wicks laid across a dowel to remember their straight minds. Stumps and ends go into the poor man's box for remelting. Beeswax, dear as good news, returns to the locked drawer with 2 careful turns of the key. Wicks are trimmed, snuffers are wiped. The lanterns that will walk the watch are filled and shuttered so flame cannot wander into straw. A sand bucket stands at each doorway where the steward's shadow will expect to see it. Lids on grain bins are palmed and found shut. The tinderbox sits with its lid left ajar, just enough to say I am ready, not enough to say I was forgotten. The watch is chosen without speech. 1 pair of shoulders now, another at midnight, another toward dawn. Each receives the same 3 instructions. Walk the hearth once each hour. Listen to the flue. Touch the door latches in order and say their names. If a coal forgets itself, smother, do not drown. If a draft stirs the ash like gossip, set the damper to a cleaner thought. If a latch tells a story you did not write, fetch the steward. Carry a stable lantern with a shield, not a candle with dreams of travel. Remember that your work is to give the morning back the room you found, only quieter. The hourglass on the mantel turns. The first watch marks the neck with a thumb and learns the pace of sand. No heroics are expected, only sequence. Weather earns its page at curfew. If wind lifts from sea or fun, shutters on the leeward side are barred so sparks cannot learn to fly. If frost sharpens the path, the scullery writes well-roped gloves and leaves them by the door. If snow talks in large thoughts, the yard boy stacks brush where drifts like to begin and lays out shovels like letters in an alphabet he can read half asleep. In drought, a covered pail stands by the bakehouse to calm the oven mouth. In storm, trenchers are carried higher on their shelves. On vigil nights, the ledger reduces fat without reducing grace. These are not grand strategies. They are treaties with air and water. Mercy is scheduled as carefully as labor. A basket at the pantry door receives tomorrow's alms while minds are still clear. 2 rounds marked for the gate. A jar of pottage promised to the woman with 2 children and no husband on the roll. Trimmings set aside for the old dog who guards without biting. The ledger's second page, Mercy, accepts 3 small lines. No trumpet, no sermon. Arithmetic with a soul. At the outer door a bell pull for the poor is tied short so it cannot wake the house like a trumpet. The night watch will answer if true need speaks, and he will answer with food, not with speech. Up in the hall, linen rolls upon itself like a tide going out. The great salt closes its lid and becomes an object again, not a line dividing ceremony from appetite. Knives that were lent are counted back into the chest with the same courtesy with which they were given. The ewer and basin rest with a clean cloth between them so metal does not kiss metal in the dark. Benches lean to their tables. Trestles stand in ranks at the wall like patient trees. The usher listens once to the stair, hears nothing that requires a human voice, and draws the bolt as if the wood could feel gratitude. Back below, the steward performs the last catechism of numbers, wages by week, allowance by rank, grain by mouth, fuel by cart, salt by stone, spice by dram, soap ash by sack, breakage by thing and by temper. He writes the tiny notes that prevent tomorrow's noise. Boy to miller with sack at dawn, butter to hall if vigil lifts, candle ration holds, send slip to gardener, parsley early. The book closes as a person lies down, without struggle, because promises have been kept. Keys return to their nail, heavy as a sleeping truth, quiet as the inside of a glove. The bakehouse gets the last human heat. The baker lays a palm against the dome and reads the stored day. The peel finds its peg. The damp plug sits ready by the lintel. A chalk scrap above the mouth says only what matters. Manchet first, Maslin after, coffins on the fall. The mop hangs where it will dry without souring. A handful of flour is left in a bowl with the measuring stick across it. A tiny bridge that tells the first boy in the door that someone thought of him. The scent in the room is the ghost of crust and ash agreeing to meet again. Silence arrives not as emptiness, but as a collection of honest absences. No hiss from the pan. No step on the stair. No ladle set down. Only banked coals thinking in red. Bricks giving back the day they stored. The soft breath of a trapped drain content with its work. Wind grazing the larder vent. A single owl writing one vowel on the edge of the yard. If a stranger stood here, they might mistake this for an end. It is not an end. It is the minute when a house holds still so that morning will find everything where promise left it. Leaven smiling. Beans drinking. Chalk speaking in short, wise lines. Keys asleep within reach. Tools at their pegs like notes on a stave that will become music again at dawn. And if someone asks, one last time, why a visitor would not manage a full day inside this hour, the reply lives on every surface. The labor is not muscle. It is sequence held in the head while the hand moves. It is numbers that turn into kindness without ceasing to be numbers. It is heat turned into food without turning into danger. It is doors that answer to names and keys that answer to hands. It is sleep granted only after tomorrow has been invited to exist. The bell in the yard breathes a final word into the stone. The kitchen answers by being ready.